You've seen the posts, the angel numbers, the signs from the universe reels. Someone sees 1111 on their phone 3 times in a week and declares that the cosmos is personally messaging them about their twin flame or their next career move. And something in you, maybe something you've been afraid to say out loud, finds the whole thing slightly ridiculous. But then something else happens, something you can't quite dismiss. You think of a person you haven't spoken to in 4 years, and they call you that afternoon. You dream about water and wake up to a burst pipe in your basement. You're agonizing over a decision, and a stranger says the exact sentence you needed to hear, word for word, as if they'd been reading the script running inside your head. And now, you're caught. Because the spiritual marketplace version of synchronicity feels shallow and performative. But your own experience, the one you can't explain away, feels like it matters, like something real is happening underneath the noise. Carl Jung spent the last 3 decades of his career trying to articulate what that something is. And the reason you've never heard the full picture, the reason every video and article you've encountered on synchronicity leaves you with more questions than answers, is that Jung's actual theory was so radical, so disruptive to how we understand reality itself, that even his closest colleagues begged him not to publish it. He did anyway. And what he put forward changes everything about how synchronicity gets talked about, if you're willing to follow it all the way to the bottom. Today I'm going to give you the complete framework, what Jung actually meant by synchronicity, which is almost nothing like what the internet thinks he meant. Why these experiences intensify during specific psychological periods. How to tell the difference between genuine synchronicity and your brain doing what brains naturally do. And the part nobody else will tell you. What synchronicity reveals about the nature of your own psyche, and why that revelation is more unsettling than any spiritual influencer has prepared you for. Let's start with the thing almost everyone gets wrong. The popular version of synchronicity goes something like this. The universe is conscious, it's watching you, and it communicates through meaningful coincidences. See a repeating number? The universe is confirming you're on the right path. Run into your ex at the grocery store the day after you journaled about closure? The universe is sending you a lesson. Everything is connected, everything means something, and your job is to decode the messages being sent to you by some benevolent cosmic intelligence. Jung would have hated this, genuinely. Because this version turns synchronicity into something passive. You're just a receiver, picking up signals from a universe that already knows what you need. It strips you of agency. It makes the psyche irrelevant, and it reduces one of the most philosophically challenging ideas of the 20th century into a self-help fortune cookie. Here's what Jung actually proposed, and I need you to sit with this because it's stranger than the spiritual version. Jung argued that there exists a layer of reality where the division between your inner world and the outer world breaks down, where psyche and matter aren't separate things interacting with each other, but expressions of a single underlying reality. He called this the psychoid level, a domain that is neither purely psychological nor purely physical, but something prior to both. Synchronicity, in Jung's framework, is what happens when this deeper layer bleeds through into ordinary experience. An event in the external world and a state in your inner world coincide in a way that carries meaning, and that meaning doesn't arise because one caused the other. The dream about water didn't cause the pipe to burst. The pipe bursting didn't cause the dream. Both the dream and the burst pipe emerged from something underneath them, something your conscious mind can't directly access, but your psyche is in constant relationship with. This is a fundamentally different claim than the universe is sending you signs. Jung wasn't saying an intelligent cosmos is communicating with you. He was saying that at a deep enough level, the distinction between you and the cosmos doesn't hold up the way we think it does. And synchronicities are the moments when that deeper unity becomes briefly, startlingly visible. Now, Jung didn't arrive at this idea casually. He wrestled with it for nearly 30 years before he had the nerve to publish. He first started noticing the pattern in his practice in the 1920s. Moments during sessions when external events would coincide with a patient's psychological state in ways that defied statistical probability. The most famous example, which he wrote about extensively, involved a patient who was proving particularly resistant to treatment. She was brilliant, highly rational, and had an ironclad intellectual defense against everything Jung tried. She could outthink every interpretation. She could rationalize away every insight. She was, in Jung's words, psychologically stuck in a way that no amount of analysis could penetrate. Her rational mind had built a fortress, and she was living inside it, unable to feel anything that couldn't be logically justified. During one session, she was telling Jung about a dream she'd had the night before. In the dream, someone gave her a golden scarab, an Egyptian symbol of rebirth and transformation. As she described this dream, Jung heard a tapping at the window behind him. He turned, opened the window, and caught an insect flying into the room. It was a rose chafer beetle, the closest thing to a golden scarab you'll find in the Swiss countryside. He held it out to her and said, "Here is your scarab." The rational fortress cracked. Something in her shifted in that moment, something that months of careful analysis hadn't been able to touch. The sheer impossibility of the coincidence bypassed her intellectual defenses and created an opening for the unconscious to finally get through. Jung told this story many times, and it's become so well known that people treat it as a charming anecdote. But he wasn't telling it to be charming. He was pointing at something that terrified him, because if this event was meaningful, if it wasn't random chance, then the entire Western understanding of causality, of how events relate to each other, of what connects the inner world to the outer world, was incomplete, radically, fundamentally incomplete. And this is where Jung did something that most people in his position would never have risked. He went to a physicist. Wolfgang Pauli was one of the founders of quantum mechanics, Nobel Prize winner, one of the most brilliant scientific minds of the 20th century. And he was also, privately, a psychological wreck. Alcoholism, a failed marriage, dreams so vivid and disturbing that a colleague referred him to Jung for analysis. Pauli became one of Jung's most significant patients and, eventually, his intellectual partner. What emerged from their collaboration was extraordinary. Pauli recognized that quantum physics had already uncovered something that matched Jung's observations. At the subatomic level, the observer and the observed couldn't be cleanly separated. The act of measurement affected the outcome. The boundary between subject and object, between inner and outer, was far more porous than classical physics assumed. Jung and Pauli spent years developing a framework together. They proposed that causality, the idea that every event is caused by a prior event in a linear chain, was only one way that events could be connected. Synchronicity represented another kind of connection, acausal but meaningful. Two events linked by meaning rather than by mechanism, connected through significance rather than through force. Jung published his Synchronicity paper in 1952. He was 77 years old. He'd waited decades because he knew what the response would be. And he was right. Many of his peers dismissed it as mystical nonsense, as the soft thinking of an aging psychologist who'd wandered too far from science. But Jung had Pauli in his corner, and the philosophical framework they'd built together was more rigorous than most of his critics bothered to discover. So that's the foundation. And I've spent this much time on it because without understanding what Jung actually meant, you'll keep defaulting to the watered-down version, the one where the universe sends you messages and your job is to decode them. That version is comfortable because it's simple. Jung's version is uncomfortable because it implies something about the nature of reality that most of us aren't prepared to fully accept. Let's go deeper. If synchronicity isn't the universe texting you, and it's instead a momentary glimpse of a layer of reality where inner and outer are unified, then a crucial question emerges. Why do synchronicities happen when they happen? Why do they cluster at certain times in your life and go completely silent at others? Jung noticed a consistent pattern across decades of observation. Synchronicities intensify during periods of significant psychological transition. When the psyche is undergoing deep restructuring, during what Jung called individuation, the boundary between inner and outer becomes thinner. Meaningful coincidences multiply. Dreams become more vivid and prescient. The external world starts mirroring internal states with an accuracy that feels almost aggressive. Think about your own experience. When have synchronicities been most frequent in your life? almost certainly during times of crisis, transformation, or intense emotional upheaval. During a breakup that forced you to confront something you'd been avoiding. During a career collapse that stripped away an identity you'd been hiding behind. During a period of grief that cracked you open in ways you didn't consent to. During the slow, painful realization that the life you built doesn't fit the person you're becoming. These aren't random correlations. Jung argued that the psyche in transformation generates a kind of charge, an intensification of psychic energy that activates the psychoid layer. When your unconscious is working overtime to process, integrate, and restructure, the barrier between your psychological world and the physical world gets thin, and things start leaking through. This is why synchronicities often carry a quality of urgency. They don't feel like gentle hints. They feel like something grabbing you by the collar. Because they're emerging during moments when your psyche is fighting to get your attention, when the unconscious has something critical to communicate, and your conscious mind has been too defended, too rational, too busy to listen through normal channels. Dreams weren't working. Intuitions were being ignored. Emotional signals were being rationalized away. So the unconscious finds another route. It speaks through the world itself. And here's where I need to challenge something you might believe, because it's the place where most synchronicity content goes off the rails. The meaning of a synchronicity isn't what you want it to mean. It's what your psyche needs it to mean. And those are often very different things. The spiritual marketplace has trained people to interpret synchronicities through the lens of desire. You want a new relationship, so you interpret every coincidence as confirmation that love is coming. You want to quit your job, so you read synchronicities as cosmic permission to walk away. You want to believe you're on the right path, so every meaningful coincidence becomes proof that the universe approves of your choices. Jung would have called this inflation. You're taking a genuine phenomenon and pressing it into the service of your ego's agenda. And the ego is masterful at this, at co-opting authentic experiences and using them to avoid the very confrontation they were designed to provoke. Real synchronicities often point toward things you'd rather not see. They illuminate shadow material. They highlight patterns you've been avoiding. They mirror back the parts of your situation that your conscious mind has been carefully editing out. The synchronicity that keeps putting a certain person in your path might not be telling you they're your soulmate. It might be showing you an unresolved wound that you keep projecting onto others. The repeating theme in your life might not be cosmic confirmation of your direction. It might be your unconscious screaming that you're caught in a loop you haven't recognized yet. Jung's scarab story is instructive here. The synchronicity didn't confirm what his patient already believed. It shattered what she believed. It broke through her rational defenses precisely because it contradicted her worldview. The meaningful coincidence served the process of transformation, and transformation requires disruption, not reassurance. So if you've been using synchronicities as a spiritual comfort blanket, as evidence that everything's fine and the universe has your back, you might be doing exactly what Jung warned against. You might be using a genuine phenomenon to deepen your sleep rather than to wake up. Now, I can hear the obvious objection forming. If synchronicities can mean what your ego wants them to mean, and they can also mean what your psyche needs them to mean, how do you tell the difference? How do you know when a meaningful coincidence is genuine insight versus confirmation bias wearing a spiritual costume? This is the question that separates Jung's framework from everything else out there, and his answer is characteristically uncomfortable. You can't tell the difference through thinking. You can't analyze your way to the correct interpretation. The rational mind, the very faculty most people use to evaluate synchronicities, is the faculty least equipped to understand them. Because synchronicity, by definition, operates outside the causal framework that rational thinking depends on. Trying to think your way through a synchronicity is like trying to hear a color. You're using the wrong instrument. What Jung recommended instead was something far more demanding, a developed relationship with your own unconscious, years of dream work, honest self-examination, shadow integration, active imagination, the slow, patient, often painful work of learning to hear what your deeper psyche is actually saying rather than what your ego wants to hear. In other words, the ability to correctly interpret synchronicities isn't a skill you can learn from a YouTube video. It's a capacity that develops through sustained psychological work, the same individuation process that generates synchronicities in the first place. The deeper you go into your own unconscious, the more clearly you can read the signals it sends. And the more honestly you face your own shadow, the less likely you are to twist meaningful coincidences into ego candy. This is why Jung was so cautious about synchronicity. He knew the concept would be misused. He knew people would grab it and run in exactly the wrong direction, toward magical thinking, toward ego inflation, toward a kind of cosmic narcissism where every coincidence revolves around their personal story. And that's exactly what happened. The concept filtered through the New Age movement, got stripped of its philosophical rigor, and became the "universe is sending me signs" narrative that dominates the internet today. If you're at a point in this process where you want to develop that deeper relationship with your own psyche, where you want to actually hear what's underneath the noise rather than just interpreting signs through the lens of what you already want, we put together something for exactly that work. It's called True Self-Discovery, 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's approach to engaging the unconscious honestly, the kind of foundation that makes everything we're talking about here actually usable in your own life. The link's right below this video. But let's keep going, because there's a layer to this that most people never reach. Here's the part where synchronicity gets genuinely strange. Stranger than beetles appearing at windows. Stranger than thinking of someone and having them call. Jung eventually came to believe that synchronicities weren't just isolated events, wasn't just a coincidence here, a meaningful moment there. He started to see them as evidence that the psyche exists in a fundamentally different relationship with time and space than the ego realizes. His work with patients revealed something he found deeply unsettling. Synchronicities sometimes involved future events. A patient would dream about an event that hadn't happened yet, and then it would happen. Not metaphorically, but literally. Or a meaningful coincidence would connect an inner state to an external event that occurred hours or days later, as if the psyche had access to information that hadn't entered the timeline yet. This wasn't precognition in the fortune-telling sense. Jung was careful about that distinction. He wasn't saying people could predict the future. He was saying that at the psychoid level, that deep layer where psyche and matter converge, time as we experience it might not operate the way we assume. The linear sequence of past, present, future might be a feature of conscious experience rather than a feature of reality itself. And the unconscious, which has access to that deeper layer, occasionally pulls in information that the conscious mind, trapped in linear time, interprets as impossible. Pauli's quantum physics supported this. At the subatomic level, particles behave in ways that violate our intuitive understanding of time and space. Quantum entanglement, where particles separated by vast distances instantaneously affect each other, suggests that at a fundamental level, spatial separation might be less absolute than it appears. If physical reality has this quality at its most basic level, Jung reasoned, then the psyche's apparent ability to transcend ordinary time and space isn't supernatural. It's natural. We just don't have the framework yet to fully understand how. I bring this up because it reframes what synchronicity actually is. It's easy to hear meaningful coincidence and think of it as a curiosity, an interesting anomaly in an otherwise orderly universe. But that's not what Jung was describing. He was describing a crack in the surface of reality as we understand it, a glimpse of something underneath that challenges foundational assumptions about how the world works, about how you work, about the relationship between what's inside your head and what's outside it. And this is where the discomfort really sets in. Because if Jung and Pauli were even partially right, if there genuinely exists a layer of reality where your psyche and the physical world share a common substrate, then you are far more entangled with the world around you than you've been taught to believe. Your inner states aren't just private experiences contained inside your skull. They participate in reality in ways that occasionally become visible as synchronicities, but may be operating constantly beneath the threshold of awareness. This is the idea that made Jung's colleagues nervous. This is the idea that got the Synchronicity paper dismissed as mysticism, because Western science is built on the separation of subject and object, the observer here, the observed over there, a clean boundary between them. Jung was suggesting that this boundary is useful, but ultimately artificial, a practical approximation, a map we've mistaken for the territory. Let me bring this back to your experience, because philosophy only matters if it changes how you live. If you've been going through a period of transformation, if your old identity is dissolving, if relationships are shifting, if you feel like the ground beneath your life is rearranging itself, and synchronicities have been increasing during this time, here's what's actually happening according to Jung's framework. Your psyche is restructuring at a deep level. The old patterns, the old defenses, the old ways of organizing your experience are breaking down. And as they break down, the barrier between your inner world and the outer world thins. You start noticing connections that were always there, but that your previous psychological structure couldn't perceive. The meaningful coincidences weren't absent before. You were too defended, too rigidly identified with your ego's version of reality to register them. This is a crucial distinction. Synchronicities don't increase because the universe starts paying more attention to you during hard times. They increase because hard times crack open the perceptual filters that normally keep you from noticing the deeper connections that are always operating. The transformation makes you more permeable, more porous, more available to the layer of reality that your ordinary consciousness screens out. And this permeability is simultaneously a gift and a danger. A gift because it gives you access to information and guidance that the ego alone could never provide. A danger because a psyche without adequate boundaries, one that's too open, too permeable, too identified with the collective unconscious, can lose itself entirely. This is why Jung repeatedly emphasized that synchronicity without psychological grounding leads to inflation, magical thinking, or outright psychosis. The people who see signs in everything, who believe every coincidence is a personal message from the cosmos, who organize their entire lives around interpreting external events as spiritual communications, they haven't accessed deeper wisdom. They've lost the ego structure necessary to make sense of what they're perceiving. Real engagement with synchronicity requires a paradox. You need to be open enough to perceive the meaningful connections and grounded enough to not be consumed by them. You need to take them seriously without taking yourself too seriously in relation to them. You need to recognize that something genuine is happening, while maintaining the humility to admit that your interpretation of what's happening might be completely wrong. Jung managed this paradox, but barely. He wrote about periods during his confrontation with the unconscious where synchronicities were so frequent and so intense that he feared he was losing his grip on consensus reality. He had to actively work to maintain his psychological footing while engaging with experiences that defied everything his scientific training had taught him. And he was one of the most psychologically sophisticated human beings who ever lived. The idea that someone with no training in self-observation, no practice in shadow work, no developed relationship with their unconscious could navigate this territory safely by watching spirituality TikToks, Jung would have found that genuinely alarming. So where does all of this leave you? Let me try to pull the threads together because I've taken you through a lot of territory, and the picture only makes sense when you see it whole. Synchronicity, as Jung understood it, is evidence that reality has a dimension we don't normally perceive, a dimension where mind and matter share a common root, where the sharp line between what's inside you and what's outside you dissolves into something more fluid, more interconnected, more strange than everyday experience suggests. These moments of meaningful coincidence become more visible during psychological transformation, during periods when the ego's tight control loosens and the unconscious gains more influence over your perceptual field. They're real, in the sense that something genuine is happening that can't be fully explained by chance, but they're also dangerous in the hands of an ego that wants to co-opt them for confirmation, comfort, or a sense of cosmic specialness. The proper response to synchronicity, the response Jung spent decades trying to articulate, lives somewhere between dismissal and obsession. You neither ignore these experiences nor build your life around interpreting them. You hold them lightly. You let them inform your psychological work without becoming the center of it. You treat them as invitations to look deeper into yourself rather than as messages from an external intelligence telling you what to do. Because here's the final piece, the one that makes this the last thing you'll need to hear about synchronicities if you really let it in. The meaning isn't in the coincidence. The meaning is in you. The synchronicity is a mirror, not a message. It reflects your psychological state back to you in a way that your normal defenses can't deflect. The beetle at the window didn't carry meaning from the universe to Jung's patient. It carried meaning from her own unconscious, meaning that was already present, but that she couldn't access through ordinary channels because her rational defenses were too strong. When you experience a synchronicity, the question to ask isn't, "What is the universe trying to tell me?" The question is, "What is my own psyche trying to show me that I haven't been willing to see?" The coincidence is the delivery system. The content comes from inside your own depths. And engaging with that content, honestly, without ego distortion, without the flattering interpretation that makes you feel chosen or special or cosmically guided, is the actual work that synchronicity invites you into. This is why Jung connected synchronicity to individuation so tightly. Both are about the same thing, developing a relationship with the deeper layers of your own psyche. Synchronicity provides the evidence that those deeper layers exist and are active. Individuation provides the framework for engaging with them responsibly. Without individuation, synchronicity becomes superstition dressed in spiritual language. Without synchronicity, individuation can become too dry, too intellectual, too disconnected from the living mystery that makes the work feel urgent. They need each other, and you need both. I want to sit with one more thing before we close, because it's the piece that changed how I understand all of this. Jung, toward the end of his life, was asked whether he believed in God. His answer has become one of the most quoted lines in psychology. "I don't need to believe, I know." People have debated what he meant for decades, but I think it connects directly to synchronicity. Jung wasn't claiming special revelation. He was describing what happens when you engage seriously with the unconscious for decades. You accumulate enough direct experience of the psychoid layer, enough synchronicities, enough dreams that prove prescient, enough moments where the inner and outer world align with impossible precision, that the question of whether reality has a meaningful dimension stops being theoretical. You've seen it. You've lived inside it. The debate about whether it's real becomes irrelevant because you've touched it with your own hands. This is what's available through genuine engagement with synchronicity. Through paying attention, real attention, grounded in psychological work, stripped of ego inflation and magical thinking. Through treating meaningful coincidences as doorways into self-knowledge, rather than fortune cookies from the cosmos. Through letting these experiences humble you rather than inflate you. The world is stranger and more interconnected than any of us were taught. Your psyche participates in reality in ways that Western culture has no framework for explaining. And the coincidences that keep catching your attention, the ones that make your rational mind uneasy, the ones you can't quite dismiss no matter how hard you try, they're pointing at something real. Something about the nature of what you are and where you fit in the larger fabric of things. Jung spent his entire career trying to articulate what that something is. He got closer than anyone before or since. And what he found doesn't fit neatly into either the scientific worldview or the spiritual marketplace version. It's wilder than both, more demanding than both, and more honest than either. The synchronicities in your life aren't proof that you're special or chosen or cosmically approved. They're proof that you're connected to your own depths, to the collective unconscious, to a layer of reality that most people sleepwalk through without ever noticing. And the invitation embedded in every meaningful coincidence is the same invitation that runs through all of Jung's work. Go deeper. Look at what you've been avoiding. Face what your psyche is trying to surface. Do the work of knowing yourself, honestly and completely, because that's the only ground from which synchronicity transforms from a curiosity into a lived understanding of what you actually are. Everything else, the angel numbers, the cosmic confirmations, the universe as personal assistant narratives, is noise. Entertaining noise. Comforting noise. But noise all the same. And you've been circling around the real thing long enough to know the difference. If this landed somewhere that matters, if you're ready to move past interpreting signs and into the actual work of engaging your own unconscious, true self-discovery was built for that exact shift. 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's methods, designed to help you develop the kind of relationship with your own depths that makes everything we've talked about here stop being theory and start being experience. The link is right below.